The title of this lecture is The Green Economy. The push for a green economy to address the threat of climate change has received significant support in progressive political and mainstream media circles, but others are unsure about these policies. One self-proclaimed sensible environmentalist pointed out that radical environmentalism, quote, became increasingly senseless as it adopted an agenda that is anti-science, anti-business, and downright anti-human. Patrick Moore wrote that to a considerable extent, the environmental movement was hijacked by political and social activists who learned to use green language to cloak agendas that had more to do with anti-capitalism than with science or ecology, end of quote. Certainly the unintended economic consequences of environmental policies must be considered. Energy poverty is bound to adversely affect the lives of many. Some of the proposed policies could be far worse than any imaginable consequence of climate change. Many of the leaders pushing for greater action on climate change argue that there needs to be a gathering of the best global experts to come up with a global plan. Only experts are up for global challenges that are too complex for anyone else. A new global elite argue that the institutions of democratic capitalism are somewhat outdated and short of new ideas. Matthias Kanten of the World Economic Forum wrote in 2009, "We need creative collaboration of fairly large numbers of diverse experts in guided, moderated processes. Innovative new ideas only emerge if there is a cross collaboration, and that only happens if it is enforced." It was the World Economic Forum, created in 1971 and led by Executive Chairman Klaus Schwab, that launched the initiatives to address the issue of global governance and global cooperation. The World Economic Forum wanted to do more than have its annual meetings in Davos, Switzerland. It wanted to increase its platform and catalyst for global ideas. The Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, however, resulted in a setback for global cooperation, according to the 2011 World Economic Forum article entitled "Running the World After the Crash." The authors, including Klaus Schwab, wrote, quote, "The world has already paid a severe price for its complacency about well-known systematic financial and macroeconomic risk. It would be a historic error, a generational abdication of responsibility to revert to business as usual," end of quote. Doing the same old thing, the authors wrote, was not working. For example, proper action on climate change, quote, "perhaps the most difficult and important global problem of all," was an international failure on full display. The World Economic Forum wanted to stop the setbacks. On the issue of slowing down global warming, one report claimed that the World Economic Forum could spend $14 trillion up until 2030. World Economic Forum continues to raise alarm that not enough is being done. In February of 2022, as stated on its website, the goals of the World Economic Forum were to enable business and governments to, quote, grow sustainable economies, help to halt climate change, and create a more equitable world. Getting on track to net zero emissions by 2050 will require annual investment in clean energy infrastructure to reach nearly $4 trillion by 2030. All of this will require a radical restructuring of the economy. Democratic capitalism needed to be restructured. It will have a major effect on the city, the home, and in industry. One example of action was a February 11, 2022 article by World Economic Forum authors Adam Gromas and Maya Bandror entitled, quote, 3 surprising reasons why cities are struggling to slash emissions. With workers commuting to cities, passenger vehicles accounted for approximately 11% of global energy emissions. This was unacceptable. Old truths about transportation planning are no longer valid. Greater use of e-scooters in the urban boundaries was one tactic for reducing a carbon footprint. Also, there was the need to electrify the transportation of high mileage drivers who commuted from outside the city. There was the expectation that people embrace mass transit. The World Economic Forum is a leader for global governance, but another powerful group is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Created in 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a rather insular group. Its members are confident that they are the only true climate scientists. These believers have no tolerance for the skeptics in the science community. Supportive of global governance and global agreements, former Vice President Al Gore is one of the main champions of the group. There have been many charges that the IPCC are guilty of manipulating data, withholding data, and conspiring to discredit other scientists who disagreed. IPCC members have made notable statements regarding the economy. In November 2010, one official stated, "One must say clearly that we distributed de facto the world's wealth by climate policy," end of quote. There was public praise for the political power of Chinese leaders. A UN official declared, "China is able to implement policies because its political system avoids some of the legislative hurdles seen in countries including the United States." The central planning goals of the IPCC are troubling for some. MIT professor Richard Lindzen responded, quote, "Global warming, climate change, all of these are just a dream come true for politicians. The opportunities for taxation, for policies, for control, for crony capitalism are just immense. You can see their eyes bulge. Given the widespread support of mainstream media for climate change action, attempting to get an accurate picture on attitudes towards climate change is challenging. Efforts to collect data from ordinary people who pay a lot of attention to the climate has resulted in interesting results. For example, in a 2013 U.S. Department of Agriculture funded survey of U.S. Midwest corn farmers, only 8% of these farmers who spend their lives in the weather and in the climate agreed with the statement, quote, "Climate change is occurring and it is caused mostly by human activities," end of quote. In his book, Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, Patrick Moore uses humor to make an important point. The 92% of corn farmers who disagreed with the statement should be awarded, quote, "honorary doctorates of science." In the face of criticism, environmentalists demand change, including bringing in political policies to shrink the economy. Canadian writer Naomi Klein argued that capitalism is irreconcilable with a livable climate. Facing climate change head on means changing capitalism, end of quote. The Barack Obama government had 18 federal agencies involved in the climate change debate. The goal was to integrate climate programs into everything the federal government did. In fact, the government spent over $40 billion on the issue in the years 2013 and 2014, and universities, green organizations, and various activities have done quite well financially. There was much money in green energy stimulus. Politically, one popular solution is a carbon tax. It is a key to raise gasoline prices enough to slow down consumption. One supporter was the Treasury Secretary of former President George W. Bush. Hank Paulson stated, quote, "What I've said about a carbon tax is some people that oppose it are opposing it because they don't like the government playing a big role." And you know, the perverse aspect of that is, frankly, those that are resisting taking action are guaranteeing that the government will be playing a bigger role, because we're seeing now that we're going to see an increasing number of natural disasters. Mother Nature acts, end of quote. In 2017, Al Gore's newly formed Energy Transition Commission called for a carbon tax starting at $50 per ton. But Gore has not always been the best spokesperson for climate change. Climate activist Stephen Lacey pointed out that we're in an era of backlash against elites. So Gore, a guy who bought a 6,500 square foot seafront home in California for $8.8 billion, and who hangs around other celebrities who talk big on climate, but who live lavish lifestyles, is the perfect target at this point in time. Another climate change activist and actor is Alec Baldwin. Actor Baldwin stated, quote, "I believe climate change denial is a form of mental illness." However, some of Baldwin's public displays of anger does not make him the best representative of climate change action. Opponents of climate change activism state that many environmentalists have become unrealistic. Calling himself a sensible environmentalist, Patrick Moore wrote, "There is no cause for alarm about climate change. The climate is always changing. Some of the proposed solutions would be far worse than any imaginable consequence of global warming, which will likely be positive." A more serious problem is poverty. Moore believed that too many environmentalists are stuck in the 1970s and continue to promote a strain of leftist romanticism about idyllic rural life powered by windmills and solar panels. They idolize poverty, seeing it as a noble way of life, and oppose all large developments. End of quote. Such romanticism suppresses the idea of a strong and thriving economy. Many environmentalists are wary of high productivity that occurs with the use of fossil fuels, but their arguments are dubious. Patrick Moore points to the problem of using science to determine the cause-effect relationship when discussing climate change. Quote, "So many variables affect the climate. The Earth wobbles, the sun's cycles, the many different greenhouse gases, human alteration of the environment, and other variables we may not even be aware of. This makes it nearly impossible to prove which of the variables have the largest impact. And then there is the fact that we have only one planet Earth. It is impossible to do a statistical analysis with a sample of one." Moore argues that the environmental movement is both a political movement that seeks to influence public policy and a religious movement, quote, "in that many of its policies are based on beliefs rather than scientific facts." Critics inside and outside the field of economics have noted the shortcomings of green policies. For example, solar panels and wind farms are constructed with non-renewable materials that cause large greenhouse gas emissions during production. According to Patrick Moore, solar energy can cost 10 times more than conventional energy. Solar energy is a very expensive option because it is intermittent and unreliable. Certainly, the sun does not shine at night, and thus solar panels are powerless for about 16 hours every 24-hour cycle. But this is the best scenario. One cannot forget the cloudy days. Although wind energy is more cost-effective than solar panels, it too is expensive and unreliable. One clear disadvantage is that wind does not track the demand for electricity. The coldest and hottest days are the peak periods for electricity, but these days are often when the wind is calm. Consequently, quote, "if wind is used for either base load or peaking power, there must be a reliable backup that can be brought online when the wind is not blowing." End of quote. A wind farm requires a gas plant or another generator of equal capacity to back it up. The better options of cleaner coal, nuclear, and hydroelectric power plants have, quote, capacity factors of 90% or higher as they run continuously. Increasing energy efficiency in our homes and cars is a worthy goal, but it has to make economic sense. Put another way, quote, conservation cannot conserve what is not produced. It is possible for American society to survive with less electricity, but forget about having a high quality of life. Concerns about climate change weaknesses have done little to dampen the spirits of progressive politicians demanding a restructuring of capitalism. In February 2019, the 113th Congress First Session House Resolution 109 presented its Green New Deal. On page 3 and 4 of the 14-page document, there is an outline of present economic problems. The United States is currently experiencing several related crises, with number one, life expectancy declining while basic needs such as clean air, clean water, healthy food, and adequate healthcare, housing, transportation, and education are inaccessible to a significant portion of the United States population. Two, a 4-decade trend of wage stagnation, deindustrialization, and anti-labor policies that has led to A, hourly wages overall stagnating since the 1970s despite increased worker productivity, B, the third worst level of socioeconomic mobility in the developed world before the Great Recession, C, the erosion of the earning and bargaining power of workers in the United States, and D, inadequate resources for public sector workers to confront the challenges of climate change at local, state, and federal levels. And number 3, the greatest income inequality since the 1920s, with A, the top 1% of earners accruing 91% of gains in the first few years of economic recovery after the Great Recession, B, a large racial wealth divide amounting to a difference of 20 times more wealth between the average white family and the average Black family, and C, a gender earnings gap that results in women earning approximately 80% as much as men at the median. Well, to fix these problems, the Green New Deal focuses on 3 basic principles: decarbonization, jobs, and justice. Decarboning the economy will mean getting the electricity sector to zero carbon. The sooner, the better. The platform wants 100% renewable electricity by 2030. This would mean the probable banning of gasoline and diesel vehicle sales. Electric vehicles are to fill the gap. The issue of airplanes remains murky. Decarbonization also includes buildings. There will be the implementation of zero carbon standards for new buildings and wholesale retrofitting of existing buildings. The decarbon strategy for heavy industry is unclear. Job creation is a central plank of the Green New Deal. The goal is to have the government grow much larger and initiate an active public sector. There will be a federal jobs guarantee. Large-scale investments of many trillions of dollars are necessary to make this job action feasible. But this part of the Green New Deal will be extremely difficult to implement. Progressive policy analysis Matt Bruning explains that the idea that thousands of administrations across the country will be able to usefully employ random flows of labor with random sets of skills and random durations is fairly implausible. A third key component of the Green New Deal is justice for low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous communities, and the frontline communities most affected by climate change, pollution, and other environmental harm. All jobs will include non-discrimination standards. All three major components of the Green New Deal are sweeping and ambitious. The whole package is best described as a, quote, policy platform, more a policy platform than a set of high-level goals. As one supportive commentator, a certain, this particular supportive commentator wrote, quote, its intent is to involve the entire citizenry in the shared project of adapting to the 21st century, and in so doing materially improve the quality of life of the poor and middle class. It is an attempt to rebalance the economy and the political system away from a monomaniacal focus on private goods towards a more generous view of public goods and public purpose, end of quote. Economist Nicholas Loris, former deputy director of the conservative think tank Thomas A. Rowe Institute, sees some glaring problems with the Green New Deal. One major problem is the likely cost of more than $5 trillion to switch from coal, nuclear, and natural gas to 100% renewables. The central planning aspect of the Green New Deal does not inspire confidence for efficient and effective economic action. Loris wrote that governments in countries such as Venezuela and China, or in the past, like the Soviet Union and Cuba, either routinely mismanage and waste resources or ramp up production with little or no accountability for environmental damage that comes with it. The absence of price signals reduces the incentive to be more efficient and do more with less. In addition, the absence of property rights reduces the incentive to conserve and give government-controlled industries a free pass to pollute without compensating or protecting its citizens, end of quote. Central planning was risky for other reasons. Pushing aside the private sector, the federal government would have an unhealthy amount of power to control people's daily lives. Second, any restriction of oil and gas production in America would not stop production elsewhere where there are lax environmental standards. Third, how realistic could the Green New Deal produce the necessary wind, solar, and battery technology to meet the immediate needs of the nation? Fourth, could authorities safely dispose potentially toxic lithium-ion batteries and solar panels or even wind turbine blades that are difficult and expensive to transport and crush at landfills. Fifth, the Green New Deal would reverse the advances made by industries such as the fracking industry. One National Bureau of Economic Research paper found that, quote, cheaper homes heating because of America's fracking revolution is averting more than 10,000 winter deaths per year, end of quote. Nicholas Loris concluded that, quote, typical for most big government environmental policies, they've so focused on prescriptive ways to control people's behaviors that they crowd out or ignore opportunities for innovative solutions. If Green New Deal policies result in less wealth creation and a lower standard of living, would the American government have the necessary revenue to solve future environmental challenges? In the end, idealistic climate change activism needs to consider the consequences and costs of policies that sound inspiring, but ones that might cause greater overall misery. In his book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, Alex Epstein offered a more positive assessment of fossil fuels. Quote, the cheap, plentiful, reliable energy we get from fossil fuels and other forms of cheap, plentiful, reliable energy combined with human ingenuity gives us the ability to realize a safer and richer world that is better prepared to meet any environmental troubles. Thank you.